Introduction to the class global sport business. Today what we're going to go over is we're going to first talk about sport as an industry. Then we'll define globalization. We'll look at some of the key elements of sport as a global business. And then finally we'll talk about the stakeholders in the global sport market that will then lead into our first assignment in this class. So when we look at sport as an industry, there's many aspects of the sport industry globally. When we look at the administration and governing bodies, probably the most prominent ones that you think of are the International Olympic Committee or FIFA, which runs global soccer. However, the NFL, NHL, and then all other national leagues and all other sub-governing bodies that fall under the IOC would all be considered governing bodies in here, as would the NC2A in the United States. When we move over here to sporting good manufacturers and retailers, these are simply the companies that make the equipment and the shoes and the uniforms. Most prominent among them in the world probably are Nike, Under Armour, as well as Adidas, although those are certainly not exclusive. Facilities and arenas refer to the places where the games take place. And so if we didn't have these large stadiums such as the Rose Bowl, or Madison Square Garden or the Staples Center, we wouldn't be able to host these mega events. We wouldn't be able to make nearly the amount of money that we make in sport today. Sport media is probably the primary source of money in professional and college sports. Networks like Sky Sports in England or ESPN in the United States pay billions of dollars in rights fees to be able to broadcast sports events, and they broadcast them worldwide. And so they are a key component of the sport industry. And like I said, probably the main economic engine of the amount of money that we see in sport today. Private sport management firms are companies that provide a variety of services to help execute sports as a product. These can be probably the most common one that people know about here are agents, but they're not the only ones. There are sport marketing firms, there are sponsorship specialists, there are public relations firms that all provide services that help sport organizations operate their business. But the ones that are probably most prominent and front and center that have had movies made about them are agents. The last component of the sport industry that directly affects sport production, although not quite as much in the U.S., are governments. So governments are responsible in most countries for providing funding for sport. In the U.S., they don't explicitly provide funding for sport, but they do provide money to help bid on major sporting events and to secure those sporting events. So when we host the Olympics, or we haven't hosted a World Cup in a long time, but when we do at some point, the U.S. government will have a role in the planning process there as well as funding security for those events. The tourism industry is sort of a tangential or sort of it doesn't really drive or create the sport industry, but it does allow the sport industry to produce products that reach more people. And by that I mean if we were having major sporting events and we didn't have the airline industry or we didn't have the hotel industry, we would not be able to facilitate events to the degree that we do. So that's kind of why it's not a major sport production part of the sport production, but it is a key contributor to our industry. So again, sport as an industry, these are the main 6 components that contribute to sport production, with the tourism industry being sort of here on the periphery but contributing in a lot of different ways. So how big is this? How much money do we end up making in the sport industry? We make quite a bit. So what the company used to be PricewaterhouseCoopers estimates that in 2019 sport will be worth over $150 billion in revenue worldwide. When we consider the elements of the tourism industry that go along with it, it could end up being a whopping $625 billion industry. So the scope of the industry is quite large. As many of you probably know and have participated in, broadcasts of top sporting events every year reach into the billions. The World Cup final in Russia a little over a year ago reached over half the world's population. And the Winter Olympics, which is not a great Winter Olympics in 2018, which was in South Korea, and by not being a great Winter Olympics, I mean it wasn't viewed widely. It was not a record-setting view. Still produced 1.6 billion video views on social media. And so the scope of the sport industry is very, very vast. Okay, so then what does globalization define? So that's the other part of this class that's a critical element. What we're talking about in terms of sport or globalization is we're talking about processes leading to greater interconnectedness among the world's people. So the couple key terms in there are, what are these processes and what does interconnectedness mean? When we talk about interconnectedness, we talk about the ability of people to communicate with each other. And we go from what used to be considered a feudal village back in the medieval times to a global village. So it is the ability of all of us to communicate via Skype, communicate via email, pick up the phone and call really anywhere in the world. If we want to get up and move anywhere in the world that we want to move. So we've got, like airplanes that allow us to do that. We can reach really any corner of the globe, probably within 24 to 48 hours. That's the sort of thing that we're talking about with interconnectedness. In addition to that, media plays a role in the interconnectedness. If you want to watch the Super Bowl, but you happen to live in New Zealand, you're able to do it. If you happen to be somebody from New Zealand and but you live in the U.S. and you want to watch the World Cup of rugby, you're able to do that, even though that's taking place in Japan. So there's just a sense that no information is really out of reach, no person is out of reach, and we can connect with other people in a deep and meaningful way. So what ways are those? That's the processes that we're referring to. And those processes occur on several different levels. First and probably foremost, and importantly for this class, is on an economic level. So because of the global system of banking, we can buy tickets, we can purchase products from countries, really any country. And we can do so as long as we have a credit card and an internet connection. So we have economic processes that link us through banking. We have economic processes that link us through trade. We also have social processes that are exchanged through interconnectedness. So those can be things like communication. Those can be social norms. Those things can ultimately be cultural, foods that we eat, movies that we share, music that we like, sports that we like. We can share those socially as well. We have technological processes that facilitate a lot of this stuff. So whereas the telephone might have been the key thing that happened in your parents' generation, apps and social media allow you to communicate and share things across platforms instantaneously. And that was not possible 25 years ago. There are political processes that are involved in this. And so if we want to do business in China, we've got a completely different political system that exists. And as the NBA found out this year, just simply tweeting about something political in China can cause a stoppage of business and damage to a long-term relationship. Whereas if we tweeted something about France or Canada, it would be much less of a firestorm because their politics are more aligned with us. So we've got economic, we got cultural, we have political processes, we have technological processes, and we have political processes. And as you can see here on the slide, these things can be very complex. They can take a long time to carry out, and they're constantly changing. So, the technology process is probably the ones that is most dynamic, and political processes take maybe a little bit longer to change. All of this ends up with us having a much smaller sense of time and space. So the world seems smaller to us. Time seems to be running faster. And as a result of this, we've got to be more adept as sport managers, and we have to be more nimble so that we can meet the demands of what has now become a global marketplace. And so that's where we're going to get to. When we talk about globalization of the sport market, the market at this point in time is really the globe. So if you are in charge of the San Francisco 49ers, you will have 49er fans all over the world. And if you happen to run Barcelona or FC Barcelona, you are going to have even more fans globally. So the key thing that we have to understand is who are the major stakeholders in the global marketplace. And your first assignment is going to get you there. I will show you on this diagram that there's no shortage of them, from Yao Ming to the NFL to Sachin Tendulkar to O2 to NBC to the stadiums and the fans that are in them. And so your job will be to identify several of these stakeholders in the global marketplace, and then to understand what goals they're seeking to accomplish in that global marketplace. And so what is it that they want? Do they want fame? Do they want fortune? Do they want to move? Do they want freedom? Do they want products? What is the role that they seek? And so that is kind of what we're going to get into in the first activity that is on the assignment.